going on?
Good day.
So this is video number 4 in our series Teaching Webflow to My Dad. You excited for this one?
I am ready to go. Let's do
All right,
this.
so this will be our last video before you can kind of take the reins. So we're going to try to cover a lot here. And then next video, we'll let you kind of just start dabbling, no pressure. But we've got a lot to cover. So let's jump right into it. All right, so since our last video, there are 2 things we've added. So the first one in our assets panel, which is right here, I added just a couple of Nessie images. So that way when we're going through the project, we'll have some assets that we can use. And the second, go ahead.
That means I got to add my first dad joke, because what would teaching Webflow to my dad be without a couple of quick dad jokes? And the first one I got to throw in would be just a quick, and you almost brought this on. I almost brought it on when you were naming this project, but you named this the Nessie site, and we were first dabbling it, and I thought, really we need to rename this project the Nessie sighting.
Oh, all right, clever.
There we go. All right, that
Interesting.
was
All right.
it.
Well,
That was it.
when we make our clone, because we're gonna end up cloning a site for like our background or our back end style guide, you can name it that. So we'll
There
give
you
you
go.
that one.
All right.
All right. So we've added just a couple of assets. These are not assets we're gonna use in the actual project, just a couple. And the second one, you'll notice there's this new symbol right here.
Oh,
And it's the FS. So this is a finsweet is a company that builds on top of the Webflow platform. So they've got great content, great integrations to Webflow. So we're actually going to be using their actually several things from them. We're going to be using their naming structure or their naming convention, their structure convention, a bunch of their combo classes, which are going to be pre-set up. We're going to end up using their pre-built style guide, and that's something we're going to clone. And they've also got this really cool extension, which has a lot of features, and we're not going to get into them all right now, but we're going to definitely utilize some of them when we build our project. So some of them end up being a lot of CMS filters. They give a calculator for like pixels to rem. They've got this really cool fluid design generator. Now this is a little advanced right now. We're just going to touch on it though. But because we're going to build this project in rem, this snippet of code that you can create right here just by changing these draggers, whatever you call these things, allows you to change the standard rem value across different screens. So this will automatically give you like smooth scrolling. So as we pan in and out of a project, it'll gradually decrease the overall size of all the elements. So it's pretty cool. We definitely have to get into that later on. So those are the 2 things we've added.
okay.
Actually, we are going to go
Now
in here
I've seen you wear something with their symbol, that logo on either your hat or that.
yes, yep, big
I've seen
fan.
that
Yep,
around.
there you go.
I did not know what it meant, so now I finally know.
Yeah, big fan of theirs. Shout out to them. Their content's pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, so I just went in and added their spacing system. So this is something you'd put into a project that you didn't start with their clonable. And then when we do have a clonable already be pre-built in there. Clone. Oh, we'll see if we can add the core page structure or just the spacing stuff. All right. Okay, I did add all of these classes. Okay, so a couple of interesting things, and there's like a lot to unpack here, so I'm trying to figure out where to start. Let's just add a div real quick. And then let's exo this. Let's go back to full screen. Okay, so a couple of things I mentioned that we're going to utilize of theirs. So the very first one is a naming convention. So like we talked about before, that you don't want to just have random elements in your project like name div block 1, div block 2. So when you are naming something, you are trying to create a systematic approach so that when you're in the navigator, you know what you're entering into. And number two, your naming convention is tied to your classes. So when you name something, you are giving it that class. That name becomes the class. So whenever you have global elements, so if you have a section or a div that you create into a section that'll wrap just sections of content throughout your web page, you will want to style that once as that's a global class, and then you'll know whenever you make a change to it, it's going to affect the entire website. So if you have a section, let's say you make an element that defines the width of your project, and you're like, all right, my entire project, actually, let's do that right here. So this div, we're going to name it section. And so we're going to give this a max width. Actually, we'll just give it a max width of 1280 pixels. And because we're following rem, we're going to divide that 1280 divided by 16 rem. So this now has a max width of 80 rem. So that is our standard rem we're going to be utilizing as our max width. So every outcrop of a section will have that set to it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so when we are making a specific section that we'd want thinner, so maybe 1,000, or let's see, 80 rem, 60 rem, we would give it a separate class. So let's add in another div real quick. Oop, we don't want it inside the previous one. And we are going to name this container. And we're going to give that a max width of 60 rem. I'm just typing in rems instead of the pixels. So you'll notice that, actually, we're actually going to use the center technique, and that worked this time. Didn't work before on the heading. So when you first start a project, you want to make very broad classes that when you apply to something, you're not going to change it on that element. So let's say we went in and added a heading, and we come down here and we add a heading. All right, now we're going to add another div block, and we're going to throw another heading, and then I'm just using Command E to open those. All right, so right now you'll notice that the first and the third look similar, even though this hasn't been given class. So we're actually going to use the command minus, and that you'll see that kind of changes the perceived pixel value up here. So as I zoom out, I can now pretend to view the screen from a larger thing. So this, okay, we didn't center that div right there. All right, so this section right here has not been given a class. Now, if we want it to have the same parameters as either of these classes, we will assign the class to it. However, if we want to make any other changes, let's say we want to have an extra padding on the side, you'll notice that right now it created a new class because you can't have something without a class. But so if I give it the class of now section, and I start making changes to it, it's going to change every other section attached to it. So you need to very carefully determine if you're making a unique change to that class. So this section is getting a unique change. I can't leave it on my global style. So instead of giving it a section class, I can give it a combo class. So here's the first way you can adjust something so it doesn't ruin it. So I could name this section, and then I'll do third header. Boom. All right, so now when I make a change to it, it will not ruin the other one. However, because it also still has the first class of section, any element, see how that changed to blue? Right on over here?
Yep.
That means it's styling, or it's taking that cue from the most recent class. So you'll notice everything else is orange. So even though it has two classes, if I now go over to header, the first section class right here, the first section, and I now add some margin on top, you'll notice it also is affecting this class because it's cascading to both of these. So any changes you make to the first class also affects that one. And then the override stays in place. So you'll notice now it has this pixel value, which I added from the previous one. If I didn't want that, I can now go in and make changes. So when we're first starting a project, creating our canvas, we only want to go in and implement global classes if we can. And we will wait till we're past the first few phases of design to start implementing combo classes. So that way, if we have to make major changes to the website, we don't have to go back and change things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, so that's how your rough classes and combo classes work. So now we know that there's a specific strategy to trying to name things. So that way, A, you can clearly find them in the navigator. B, that when you have a new element, so when you add a div block onto the page, you want to know, let's say you have made a style that you want to apply to it, you want to be able to type in that name and find it. So it can kind of be overwhelming to find a naming solution. So luckily, finsweet, let's go. Let's see if they got /
That's fierce.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right. So finsweet has a naming strategy called Client First. So it is a detailed guide on how Webflow users should name all of their classes. So this is what we will be learning and implementing. So I don't know if we're going to go through all of this. There's a lot of documentation in here on how you name everything, but this is how we'll be building our website in. So probably we'll learn this off. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. But once you start using it, it's actually very simple and very intuitive. But there's a lot of reading, and so we'll probably tackle that off screen. We'll kind of talk about the concepts of it. So there's a couple things to know. So the first is obviously the naming convention. We're going to name things strategically. Let's see if we can find anything. So they have a rough, here we go. They're global class system. So they have 3 types of things we're going to be learning. So we're going to learn the structure, which is essentially how you're going to name stuff. 2, you're going to name or learn how to turn typography into classes. So that way your whole project, you can have a small amount of custom classes for your text and apply them very quickly. And the 3rd is spacing. So one of the things that finsweet teaches is that you do not want to have a lot of combo classes. So here I'll show you a reason. So let's say we have our heading. Okay, let's close the side thing, and we've got a heading. All right, so let's say I want to start doing stuff. So let's say I want to change this heading to a different color. Now remember, this base class is going to be applied everywhere to the site. So I want just this one to be blue. So we would make a combo class, and we're going to call it blue. And so then we'll go down to our typography color, and we'll just grab a blue color. All right, well, the next thing I want to do is I want to center it. So I'm going to make a combo class and call it centered, just in case I have other blue text that I don't want centered. I can't just apply it to the blue thing. I have to center it. And then let's say I wanted to do something else. Let's say I wanted to change the size. So now I'm going to make another combo class and call it large. And now I'm going to increase this. We're going to go 3 rem because we're not using pixels. Now let's go 4 rem. All right, and now you'll notice that while I got the solution and I have a bunch of new classes, if I now want to change the color, if I change the color here, it will now change the color anytime somebody uses the large class. Because whatever class is the last one, any changes you make will apply from those sections. So you'll notice now it's blue here. So it's taking it from that class. So to do this correctly, I would have to now go and delete these other classes. And so now I have to go, now that it's on blue, I can go in and change this color to red or something, even though its class is blue. And now I can go grab those other the classes. So I can grab center and I can grab large. And now it does the same thing. So I had to go back and do all those steps. That gets extra complicated when you start talking about structure elements to the website, like your div blocks and stuff. So let's say I start out with nothing here. We're going to delete this. We're going to do Command E. We're going to do a div. We now have a section. So we have a section. And inside our section, we're going to add another div block. Actually, no, here's what we'll do. We'll turn our section into a grid. And inside this grid, we're going to get rid of one of the rows. We're going to add a Command E. We're going to add another div. And we're going to call this now left grid. And let's add a color to this. So let's say we add I need a background color, not a. All right, you'll notice that only went and changed it inside this one div. So if I want to do it for the whole section, I'd have to come in here and start changing the color here. All right, so let's say I wanted to change, or actually, wait, let's take this and reset it. All right, so this is the easiest way to do it. I set one color class on the back of the first section. Now, if I wanted to color these intersections differently, I could now apply them to the next layer down. Because if you look at this in our style panel, I've got a left grid and a section. So instead of now applying multiple classes, or multiple combo classes to the same thing, you can just add in a new div and add the next class to that. So we'll notice anytime we want to add padding or margin, we'll do it on a separate section than we would for anything else. So let's say, I'm going to try to make a good example for this. All right, let's say I had two sections. So Command C, Command V. I've got now two sections. All right, so let's say in this first element, so I've got a div block inside my left grid, inside my section, which is a grid. Does that make sense? How those are sorting?
Okay.
All right, so if I want to make a change, let's say I want to, let's actually add our image here. So in this last div, we're going to add an image, and then we're going to choose our image, and we're going to grab this little guy. And in this div, we're going to add another image, and we're going to choose, settings, choose image. We're going to grab this guy. All right, so let's say we just want this Nessie 20 pixels off the left, okay? So if we now go into our left grid and now add in some spacing, you'll see it's going to start changing the previous one. Mm-hmm. All right, so we might not want that. So we will now need to go just to the actual element, and we'll name this second Nessie. And now we can add some padding to that. However, you'll notice, so if we look back in our navigator, so we've got this, they're duplicates. The images are named differently. Let's actually first Nessie. All right, so we noticed we made we added the class, the styles to this class, the unique class. Okay, so if we wanted, let's say, both of these sections to be a different color, we can then apply it to the actual element they have in common, which is the left grid. Okay, so if I go to this div block and I change the color to blue, I'm in typography, and you go down to background. If I change this to blue, it will only change that because this is a custom class. It's not duplicated like left grid is. It's not named the same. So if I now want them to be the same color, that didn't work on this div. So I need to Command Z. I'll undo that. If I go to the left grid and now apply a color to it, it now takes those changes. So that is the beauty of stacking div blocks. It doesn't take much computer load, but it allows you to make changes that you can say, oh, I want to go find the highest div that they have in common, and I'll make changes to that so it applies to both. And you can have also unique divs under the common divs if you just want it to apply to that. So we still want them to be named, we still want them to have common parent elements, so that way when we want to make big changes to the website, let's say we decide, you know what, this whole element should be further off from the left side, or let's say closer to the left side. So we might want to grab our let's see if I close that. We might want to grab our left grid and say, you know what, we want the images, the thing all the way over here. So we might go in and grab some of the margin, and we're going to pull it all the way to the grid. Okay, and that only worked because they had a class in common. So a really great technique for when we get into actually designing stuff is to stack div blocks. And that is something that you'll notice right here that they do for their core structure. So this is their structure that they use on every page. So we're going to now go implement that. I hopefully explained why there's the benefit to having stacked classes so that you can go make wide changes to your website. So I wanted to just show you this and how it actually would apply in a thing before I go in. We're going to mimic this core structure. So we're going to go delete both of these sections. All right. So the first thing you'll notice, we're just going to make this from scratch, but when we clone the project, this will already be done. But I just wanted to build it from scratch so you can kind of see how it works. So the first thing you do on every page is we're just going to make we're going to grab a div, and you're going to make something called the page wrapper. So we're going to change this name to page wrapper. All right, so all of our content will now sit in this page wrapper. So when you open up when you open this project up, you'll see body and then page wrapper, and you will not see anything else. If we add a new div, that's now inside of this. So we'll have to click to open it. So it makes it very clean. So if you now wanted to copy this whole page, you could now do one copy. You can copy this one element and bring it to a new page versus having to do it multiple times over. And then you could turn this whole page wrapper into a style. All right, so the page wrapper, it is the biggest global class besides the body. So the only thing we will apply to a page wrapper is, I think, a couple things. So we may do an overflow hidden, so nothing will show from the outside of the website. If you've ever been on one of those websites where they had like an image that was like twice as wide as the rest of the site, and it would do like this weird scrolling?
Yes.
That is because they did not hide anything that overflowed the bounds of their website. So on a page wrapper, we might do an overflow hidden. We might do, all right, the maximum size we want for the entire website is 100 rem or something like that. We might apply that here. We might also determine that we want margin on the entire website. So there's a little bit of spacing on the outside of the website. That's something we might want on the entire website. There might also be times where we want images to abut the website. So unless it is a truly global where it'll apply everywhere, we won't add it on this one. So inside of our page wrapper, that's the very first section. The next item they have inside of it is their nav. So we are actually going to do Command E. We're going to grab out a nav. Boom, we're adding a nav bar. Actually, you know what? I don't want this div block sitting here. All right. Then the next thing they do is add a main wrapper. So this main wrapper will be wrapping the rest of the content for our website. So we're going to now grab another div, and we are going to name this main wrapper. All right, and now inside of our main wrapper, they've got a very interesting way to organize information. So you'll notice it goes main wrapper, section, page padding, container large. And I'll kind of explain what that does. So we're going to go and build this real quick, and I'll explain as we go. So now we are going to add a div. We don't use the regular section. We're going to add a div, and we are going to call this section. And we're actually going to clear all of the classes that we had put on there during before. We should not have used that class. All right. So this section, I'm going to take off grid, go back to regular. This section will represent a chunk of content on our website. So whether it's an about section, a contact form section, a hero section, we will use a section as every chunk of website will be inside of a section. So we're now going to create several of these. So we're going to make 5 of them. Let's say you had an about section, a contact section, a nesty section, or whatever you're going to do. You'll have sections. Now, inside of a section, we're going to add another div, and inside this, the first div will give you the width of the entire project. So you might come in here and, all right, say for the max width of, we're going to call this container dash large. And we're going to say, all right, the max width for this is 80 rem, and it's going to be centered. And then in our next section, we're going to add another div, and we're going to give this a class of container medium, and we're going to go 60 rem and center it. And you'll notice that's thinner than the previous one. So now in the next section, we can be like, all right, how wide are we going to want this section? Is this going to be something we want very narrow? We want it to take up the full width. If we want it to take up the full width, we don't give it a container class. We would just leave it and start adding stuff in. So let's say, all right, we're going to add a div in here, and you know what? I don't want this to be too wide, so we're going to type in container, and this time we're going to add a class. We're not creating a class. We're going to click container medium, and now we've given this medium. Down here, we're going to add a div, and we're going to give it the class of container large. I'm just typing in, it's automatically populating. And so you'll notice now we've got these global classes. So if you want to make a change on the width of this section right here, the one where my mouse is, you wouldn't go in and just start, you know what, I want to make this a little smaller. I'm going to go 50, because now it's going to change every other section on your website. So we want to be very conscious that when something is a global class, and we'll learn about these over here, we are giving it a very wide parameter to work within. We're not making small tweaks. So when you build a website, you're going to start with very large sweeping styles, and you're going to slowly ratchet it down. So each of these sections, when we actually go and build it, so we're going to click duplicate class. We're going to name this, is this the first section? All right, so we're going to name this, we're going to section dash Nessie images. I did not spell it right at all. Nessie images. All right. So now this is a combo class. This is a custom class. So we can now go make any changes to this Nessie images. Like we can now go change the background color, and it will not affect any of the other sections because it's a custom class just to this one. So all of the sections will be a custom class that you'll name section dash whatever it is. So that way when you go over the navigator, let's close this all, you'll open up the page wrapper, you'll see the nav bar, you'll see the main wrapper, and then we'll add the footer beneath. But then you'll go in here and be like, all right, so this is the first section we have a name. So let's drag this one up. All right, so this is the section for Nessie and images. All right, so we're gonna open up our container, and I want to add a grid of our two of our images. So I could, while I'm on this div, this container medium, I could turn this into a grid, except that when I do that, it now turned this one into a grid. And I don't want that because container medium was a global class. So I'm going to go inside the container medium, and I'm going to add just another div. Right. So now in here, I've got a div, and I'm going to name this div Nessie image grid. All right, so now I can change this to a grid. And we're going to remove one of the rows because we just want two images. And you'll notice it did not affect any of the other classes on our page. So when in doubt, start by using large global classes. And if you notice, and even potentially, because you could have classes on other pages that might get affected, if you're making a change to a class, it either needs to be a custom class, so it's the only thing that has that name, or you need to add another div block and rename that. So it's fine to have something 10 div blocks deep. It's much better than having it all on one class and then accidentally changing classes on other pages. All right. So inside of our Nessie image grid, we've got two sides. We could just go and add an image to each of them, but we already learned in one of the previous videos that if you want to change something to a flex box, it's better to add another div. So we're going to add another div. And in this div, we're going to name this, what was this? Our Nessie. So we're going to name it left copy wrapper. All right, So in here, I'm going to do Command E. I'm going to add a heading, and I'm going to add Command E, and I'm going to add a paragraph. And we're actually going to change this background because it is hard to see. Now we're just going to make it off-white. And then on this right side, I'm going to, let's just make this a little bigger so we can see what's going on over here. All right, so I'm going to grab this. I'm going to do Command E. I'm going to grab a div, and I'm going to name this div right image wrapper. And I'm going to do Command E, and I'm going to add an image section in here. I'm going to choose our image, and we are going to add just one of our images in. All right, so now let's say we want this centered. Well, luckily enough for us, we added the just a div to this, so we can now change this to flex box right here, and we can align it in the center. And now that's over here. We can now line up this whole thing in, let's see, I want, there we go. I don't want that one. I don't want to grab that. All right. So just building that simple, this little simple thing seemed like a lot because it doesn't look that pretty. We added a bunch of classes. Now, we could have just done is we could have just made just the one container, and then we could have given it a class, and we could have given every section, we could just start naming stuff as we go. The problem is if you ever wanted to duplicate this section, any class or any changes you make to this section as like styles on it, if you go and just start naming it randomly, when you're on the second page of your website, you're never going to remember what you built on the first website. So while a naming system is a lot to learn up front, it really will save you a lot of time and hassle when we're going down the road. So that is like an introductory to the naming classes, how you do the core structure of a website. So that's how you'll structure everything. That's what you'll name the classes and how you'll structure it. So that's the first element. That's the structure. We learned the rough basics of that. Typography is very similar. So the one thing that the finsweet clone has is a style guide. So in Webflow, it is very common for the very first page you build not to be the home page, but a style guide. So it is somewhere where you will outline every element you're building on the website, and there will be one copy of everything on that. So every text element, every paragraph, every section, every button, your navigator, your footer, your symbols. And so that way, anytime you want to make a change to something and you're not sure where it might be on the website, you just go to your styles guide panel and you change it there.
Oh,
the second, it's very handy. The second thing it does is it allows you to tackle a lot of the project before you even started building the canvas. So let's say you were going to build a website and it was going to be on a black background and all the text needed to be white. So instead of going into every text thing and changing it to white, you'll just make a global class for text and say all text on this website is going to start out being white, and you can always specify it's black later on, but that'll be on your style guide. And when you get control of on the next video, when you're playing with stuff, we'll actually pull out their style guide, and so you can kind of play around, and we'll goof off in there, but you'll kind of see how that works. So that is the style guide where you'll learn where you can implement a lot of the typography. So it's how you size like all the text stuff, if you want different styles to it, the weights of it. So if you want bold, you're just going to type in a class. So for example, right here, instead of going to say, all right, I want to go and change this heading to bold. Now I got to go down here. I got to find the weight, and I got to go in here and change it. You can just type it. You'll be able to type in. You'll know that you'll learn that. And so you'll just think, all right, text, weight, bold. And it actually gets very intuitive because you'll be like, all right, I want to change the text, weight, blah, blah, blah. And you'll be able to click it right away. And it's already done there. So we're going to go through off video, and we're going to go through all this documentation, and then I'll get it. So the last thing in their classes is spacing. So you know how to make structure. You know how to change styles to copy and text and stuff. The next thing is how do we go in and change spacing? So right now, if we see this element, you'll notice that Nessie is touching the top and the bottom of this element. And if this was an actual section of the website, we probably want it to take up 50% or 75% of, the top of the screen. So the one way we can go and do that is we could go and make the actual section larger. So we can say the minimum height is going to be 40 rem. All right, so now we'll notice it's kind of weird. It still didn't pull it down into it. It's because we have another section inside this section. So we'll have to go look at our container medium. And we already know we don't make styles to our main class, right?
All right.
Because if we do a change here, it's going to affect
There's
everyone.
another one.
So we can either add another one. So what we would do, and I think we did not add this. All right, so we're going to do a Command E, and we're going to do a div. And so we'll just drag this div now up here, and we're going to put the container in this div. And so on this div is where we'll actually apply how tall we want the section to be, not on this. Because if I put it here, it doesn't help us change any of this content. So we're actually going to now get rid of this height. We're going to go to this div, and we would actually name this vertical padding. And we are now going to give it 10, maybe 10 rems of padding here and 10 rem of padding there. And now it's in the center. So all we did is we utilized, and that class, that vertical padding class already exists, and we'll learn that in the spacing thing. But suddenly, we could actually change this to 25 rem. That might be too much. Let's go. I'm going to hold the Command or the Alt button. Command Z. We're going to hold the Alt button. And we're going to, you know what? We want to take up. This is not quite how we do it later on. But suddenly now our website opening could look like this. Oh, so we didn't have the full width of the page wrapper because we want to center that. All right, so that's how that section would start out looking. So it doesn't look too great, but that is some of the basics. So we're going to use global. We're going to learn about global classes that we can easily and quickly make changes to our website on the whole page. And then later on down the road, when you're like, you know what, I want to actually move this heading over 10 pixels one way or the other, you'll make those final changes on the very last round of your website build. So there's a structure convention, which is always stacking div blocks inside other div blocks. So that's the first like takeaway is anytime you're in doubt, stack another div block. The second thing is you want to have a really clear naming convention. And when we download the clone of theirs, they'll already have all the text, the spacing, all of the sections pre-named. So you'll just have to memorize, all right, I want to start with the section. I want to then go to the container, the padding. And once you get that down, you'll just search for it. And the class will already be pre-built with the settings that you won't change because they are global ones. The next thing is their actual, I guess, what would you call this? A widget, I suppose. So they've got a bunch of cool things in here about doing like changing breakpoints, removing color swatches, just a bunch of really cool things in here that we may utilize. But this, because finsweet is an integration to Webflow, this is something we will learn as we utilize it, unlike Webflow, like all the style panels and stuff where we just went and learned it. We'll save those for as we learn it. And then we also discussed adding classes and applying settings to classes. So one good just rough takeaway about when you're working in the designer or Webflow designer is be very methodical. A lot of times it's going to be a puzzle. Like, all right, I want Nessie in the middle right here. How do I get it in the middle of the page? So like right now, we went and added in like padding. There's ways where we could actually, let's just zero this out. So before, when we went and added the section, let's say we went and added the margin before, there's many ways to do it. It's like, for example, we could grab inside container medium. The Nessie grid is a custom class, so we can make changes to that. We can do different styles about how it's sorted. We could go to Flexbox and we could have it stack vertically, and we could have it align in the center and in the center of the page. We can change all sorts of things about how its layout is using Flexbox Grid and the regular block element. So once you've got the outer wrapper where you want it to be, there's ways to tweak the content inside of it. So like if you want it side by side, you might, ooh, I do want a grid. If you want it stacked, it might be kind of weird to, let's say, delete a column and have a 2 by 2 grid. Like you could, but now you're gonna they're gonna be like the same height. So it might be easier just to like, you know what, I'm gonna do Flexbox, I'm gonna do verticals. So there's numerous ways to get to the same answer in Webflow. The best question is how can I, whatever solution I use, how easily will I be able to understand what I did when I look back? And that's one of the things I had a hard time with is when the first website I built in Webflow, I didn't use the finsweet naming tools. And I would go back a week or two later and I have to make changes for the client. And I'd be like, wait a minute, what was I doing here? What was I doing this with this class? I didn't know where I had applied the padding to. I didn't know where the margin was coming from. I didn't know where the spacing was coming from. And it's like right now, let's close this all. I can now open up this main wrapper. Oh, the first section is gonna have my Nessie images. Okay, there's padding. So now I know there's gonna be padding to this section. Okay, there's a container that has all the content in it. Ooh, all right, now there's a Nessie image grid. Okay, so now I have copy on the left and a wrapper on the right. Obviously, we changed this from grid. So we'd want to, what did we do? We added in a column. And so even though this looks like it's now 10, 20 layers deep, it makes much more sense when you come from nothing. So like you just open up one at a time. It's very different than just like seeing a whole, now I'm like, wow, what is all this stuff? But as soon as you realize that every time it goes down a layer, you're just going to apply one styling to each class. So like the first one's just going to wrap it and it's your custom name. So you can change the background without changing the background in other sections. The next one is going to give you the height, the padding on it. The next one is going to determine how wide it is. The next one is going to determine because this is a custom class, you can either give it a grid, a flexbox, or just a regular block. And every time you go down, you're just making one decision at a time. All right, how tall is the section? How wide is the section? How much padding is there? As soon as you realize, oh wait, I only have to make one decision at a time. It's not a very complicated, it's man, I have to come up with 10 div blocks. You're realizing that you're gonna go. It's like a little puzzle, a little decision tree. It's like, all right, how tall do I want the section? All right, how wide do I want the section? And that is the benefit of having this client first classes, is it allows you to make one decision at a time and come up with really good layouts instead of starting at a blank canvas. Like, wow, where do I even start? I've got an image and some copy. So that's the really cool thing about the classes. So we're gonna off camera, maybe we'll film a little time lapse or something. We're gonna go through a lot of this just so you can kind of learn the finsweet strategy, and that'll probably fill in the gaps a lot of the stuff I talked about. So we're gonna learn that. We are then going to we'll probably clone it in the next video so everybody else can see how to clone something as well. And then once we've cloned that, we're just gonna let you go in and play. And we're not trying to build anything. You're just gonna go around and now fiddle with the stuff we talked about, because I mean, even just knowing where to find something is the first battle we want to win. We don't want to have to like, all right, now you're going to go build this section. So I think that's what we'll do. I think we're at a good place to stop and kind of now take a deep dive off camera into all of this stuff.
And what will become quickly obvious is how big of a fan I am of finsweet is if I come back with some gear as well. If I come back with a finsweet hat, then people will be like, yeah, this really caught on quick.
For me, when I first started learning Webflow over WordPress, probably the first year of, kind of dabbling, just building some smaller sites in it, it was like, wow, this is a lot of work. It is so much harder, so much more complicated than WordPress. And yes, sure, you can do things that you can't in WordPress, and your imagination is almost the limit. But it was really until I found the finsweet, like their structure, that it became so much easier to manage a project. You feel so much more confident going in to tackle it because you have all of that back end stuff. So it is definitely a steeper learning curve, but once you get over the learning curve, like you're like, holy smokes, this is so much simpler than I thought it was going to be. So
That's one of the things you're really good at to begin with is that strategy component, and you excel at to anyway. So
and I
awesome.
definitely,
Good.
yeah, definitely for me, I would rather spend 100 hours up front learning something and becoming really efficient than having to spend 3 times as long building a project. So,
Yeah.
all right, well, we're going to do some
Great.
learning. And then by the time we come back, you'll be a master, a professional. And then we'll go from there. We'll have some fun.